Yes, it's 7 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Remember that back in the day? The curfew thing? Was it 11 o'clock? Didn't they do that on TV?
I don't know.
Where are you people from?
Our kids are homeschoolers, and we live way out in the country. Nobody has a curfew.
No. When I was a kid, I swear on TV they'd go, it's 11. Parents, it's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Anyway, this is Annoying Peasant Radio Show. We're going to get started here. I think, if I can get my act together, which I really can't. This is going to be the sick person show tonight.
Yeah, we're sucking on cough drops.
Yeah. So bear with us. Here we go. Hey, that's Mac DeMarco, by the way.
I like that.
Oh, I got to play here with the volume, and there we go. We'll fade him out a little bit. Anyway, thanks for joining us. It's a unique edition of I guess every one is a unique edition of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. So
unique
anyway,
is one word.
Yeah, unique is one word to describe it. Tanya says, I have Tanya, the Northwoods Mom, with me tonight. Thanks for joining me, Tanya.
Well, thanks for inviting me and letting me have this topic kind of as my baby here.
Yes, this is actually maybe not the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. This is the Tanya Show.
Oh, yeah. No pressure. Once again.
No pressure whatsoever. So we're going to focus essentially entirely on education. And Tanya's got a whole lot of good stuff for us.
We've been promising to do this forever. We keep saying we need to talk about this topic.
And we're going to make our attempt to deliver tonight.
It's a very broad topic.
But hey,
I had to figure out where to go with it.
We do, and I know we're not going to do our regular format where I do this big introduction. Well, I don't know, big introduction. A little introduction, and we do some news and announcements. We're going to forego that.
I hate the news. We get to skip the news.
No, I'm going to do one thing to you. That's what I'm getting to here. Check this out. I want to see if you saw this, and I got to get to the right tab here. This just freaked me out. I don't know if this is the news of today. I think it was. Yeah, wait.
Well, great. Then I won't know what it is.
I know. This is going to be awesome, though. You got to... I'll post this story. Okay, wait. Here's the title. This is from the Huffington Post. Report. DEA agents allegedly hosted cartel-funded sex parties with prostitutes.
Oh, my.
Okay, wait. So here's and again, I'll post the article on the Facebook page so you can check it out. But check it out.
Okay.
Here's the deal.
So what do we need to know about this?
This is the essential deal. So we have DEA agents, and to be honest, I can't. It was South America somewhere. I can't remember or Central America. They're stationed there to fight the drug war, right? Specifically, essentially, they're going against the giant drug cartels.
So they're doing a really good job fighting crime.
Yeah, they're going to cartel-hosted sex parties. They knew. It's not that they went to a party and we didn't know who's paying for it. No, they knew it was actually the drug cartels were paying for it. So you go, oh, that's kind of bad, right? Well, wait, there was a number of articles, and I don't know if it's actually in this one. They said they actually had prostitutes in the place that the government rented for them. Now, I don't know if that means it was their office location or their quote-unquote home apartment where they were sleeping, right? But they had prostitutes in there that were paid by the drug cartels to stay in there while they were at the sex parties, too. So the whole point is, could they have been on the computers and, what were they doing? It's like, oh, you got to... And wait, this didn't happen once. This didn't happen twice. This happened over a period of like 10 years. This is, apparently, as it turns out, this is probably one of the perks of being a DE agent and stationed in these areas. But I just thought that was just, okay, in a weird way, too good to be true.
I don't even know what to say to that. That's just crazy.
Yeah. And I saw this post, and I think actually this article was posted by Lou Rockwell, if I remember right. And he had some really good quip of a comment before it. So it was really funny. I'm like, well, I got to look at this. And
he always has interesting words for...
So anyway,
I
couldn't let that one go by today.
What are the words that he uses? I'm in such a fog that I may not be able to think of things. So you might have to help me here. And my ears are all clogged up, so I may be talking too loud, but I'm all drugged up. So
That was a disclaimer alert.
Yeah, so if I'm a little out of it, I apologize ahead of time. But see now, okay, I thought we were going to have one show where we didn't have to talk about news stories. We could just go right into our in-depth topic.
And we are. Let's go.
See, now you already messed me up. No. All right, okay, you have a job to do, though, because if there are any new listeners here, you need to talk about what is the purpose of this show. Why are we doing this?
When you say what's the purpose of this show, do you mean specifically
Not
this
this
education
show specifically, because I'll talk about that. But you have to kind of share about
what Annoying Peasant Radio is.
What Annoying Peasant Radio is for, because it's your show. I'm tagging along here for the ride.
No, that's not how it works. Well, but the show really is about a political philosophy, and the political philosophy that the show is about is one of freedom. Okay, and then what is that, and what does that look like, and all that. That's where the show winds up going. One of the subsets being education that we're going to handle tonight. Really, it's about a society without the legalized use of coercion, right? It's the non-aggression principle. It's private property rights rooted in self-ownership, all these things. And these are topics that we talk about. And by the way, next week will all be about, next week, Tuesday, our regular time, will be about self-ownership. What is it? Where does it come from? Blah, blah, blah. What is it?
Good,
what are its implications?
That's a foundational
yes.
idea. And we say without the legalized use of coercion, people are probably going, what the heck are you even talking about now? I mean, we will, at times talk about the idea of not having the state or not having the government as we know it. And a lot of people think that's a really crazy idea. But since the state is the legalized use of force against peaceful people, we're always talking about the fact that you own yourself and your justly acquired property, and no one has the right to use force or the threat of force against you unjustly, even if they call themselves an authority or have a special position or a badge or a uniform
or a costume, as I like to call it.
Don't necessarily have the right. So that's can be kind of radical, but
yes, people see it as that. I wrote a little thing to somebody, and we just talked about, I just lost my thought exactly what I was going to tell you, what I was going to add to that. Doggone it. But it is I don't want to, what some people think is, I guess, what's the word? Objectionable is not exactly the word, but they're really just controversial. The issues. It's not that they're offensive is the word I was looking for. Sorry. People get offended that you maybe say something against the state, that you say it shouldn't exist, or it doesn't do the right things, or it can't do the right things, or whatever. So people get offended and they find that offensive. It's really not offensive. And I'm not changing if a person claims they're offended, then they're offended. I'm not arguing that. But it's the intention, of course, is not to be offensive. It may in part be to be controversial because people don't think about this stuff, which is, again, the purpose of the show, to bring these things to the forefront that people don't really think about. They engage in actions and they don't really understand that maybe what they are doing is using aggressive force or using a third-party agent to do it instead of themselves directly.
And that's why I think that the topic that we're doing is important, and I want to kind of explain how that connects starting out, kind of what our goal is. Because when we talk about issues, most people take education as an issue. This show, if we're talking about education, we talk about educating people all the time, and that's almost a bigger definition. But, people are either going to think we're going to talk about what's wrong with the public school system, or knowing that I'm a homeschooler, that I'm going to talk about homeschooling. This is not a state of homeschooling freedom show. You can find those shows. They're all over the place. I mean, lots of people are talking about that stuff, but we want to come at it from a different direction and, criticize the entire system as a whole and explain kind of how we got to where we are today and what's wrong with that. And then one thing I have to really thank my husband for, Lucas, he's here outside the door somewhere. Yeah. We've had hours and hours of conversation on this topic because I was going to do this show, but he always challenges me because we talk about these things and he always wants to make sure that we talk about, if you learn something and you change your mind about something, then you're going to want to, the next question you ask is, what can I do about this? How can I take some action in my life to change things? So yeah, I guess when it comes to talking about education, I would hope with this show, maybe it's a big goal, but if you listen to what we're going to talk about here, that I would hope to convince you that the schooling you received, if it was a public school education and possibly even if it was a private school education, that it was not intended to give you a real education. It had a completely different purpose. It was intended to indoctrinate you to serve state and corporate purposes and ends. So it's working beautifully for that purpose. Yeah. Right now. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is probably going to sound like the stuff of conspiracy theories. It's so crazy. Add that. It's so nuts. You'll think it's not real.
Right.
So I would encourage you. I'm going to give you the sources that I've used and places you can go if you want to check it out for yourself, because it's real stuff, but it sounds like it's made up.
Let me just interject. Like we started at the show is to, explain to people what they're doing may actually not be what they think they're doing, right? And this is the same thing when you say we're going to do a show on education. I think the lead-in you just created gives people an explanation that they probably weren't expecting. If most people go, oh, you're going to do a show on education. Yeah, so we should get more, they say more science, technology, what is it, STEM? Mm-hmm. The STEM, science and math, basically.
Right.
And that's what most education shows are about. And I would argue incorrectly, but that's a separate argument. We're specifically not necessarily going to be talking about that kind of stuff. This is a different viewpoint on this, a more, I would argue, a holistic view of what is education, what's the purpose of it, what's the stated purpose of it, the system we have now, which I know.
Right, and when we look at this system, we look at the system of forced schooling, compulsory education that we have here in the United States today. The history of it is really amazing and disturbing. And so, like I said, I hope to convince you that maybe it's something other than what you thought it was, and that may cause you to ask other questions and want to educate yourself. One thing I put down here in my notes, because you've been talking about this on recent shows, you've made the comment lately on several shows that this understanding this requires context.
Yes.
And that most people are like, hey, just explain it to me in 5 minutes. And if it doesn't make sense to me, it's not what I'm used to
hearing, it's not a good argument.
I'm just going to, it just doesn't work. And I'm just going to throw it out. The idea of not having the state and all of that stuff. And you've made the comment a couple of times that it's kind of like saying to someone says, okay, explain theoretical physics to me in 5 minutes. And if you can't do that, then it's just not practical and it just won't work. Yeah. Well, I would also like to point out that on other shows, and lots of times you've said to me that this is kindergartnerism. This is not hard stuff, okay?
It is true.
So it's not theoretical physics. So I'm going to take issue with you on that. I'm going to say, if this is kindergartnerism, and this is, I think I posted something on the page not too long ago on the Facebook page that said, these kids get it, these adults don't get it. That this is basically, don't hurt people, don't threaten people, don't steal their stuff.
Yes.
And that's basic stuff we all know going into the beginning of our schooling or education. So what is it that gets in the way of that basic understanding that we had as little children? What is it that has gotten in our way? I would say it's not like theoretical physics, because that is really hard. I would say all of you are capable of understanding this, but we have a filter that's been placed on us. We have something that has been kind of installed in us.
Yes.
Largely through our so-called education,
software
or our schooling.
Update 2.0.
Other ways too. There's a lot of other ways that it gets there, but the school system is a huge, huge part of it. And so that's the thing I want to talk about.
Yes, you've been indoctrinated, and that's why this seems difficult or unworkable or it's all theory. It won't work in practice. However, whatever rationalization people give to it, but it really is kindergartnerism. There's no doubt about it. It's really simple. That's why people think it's so complicated.
Right. See, I disagree. So I disagreed with you on something. We said we have to disagree more often. We're always on the
Hey, I
same
disagree
page.
with myself all
Not
the time.
theoretical physics. But I agree with you on the kindergartenism thing.
Yeah.
But no, if that really ticks you off or annoys you, or you really disagree with us that we say you've been indoctrinated or you've been duped, then keep listening and just give us a chance, and we'll talk about it, and hopefully we can talk about what you can do about it if we can actually convince you that it's true.
It should annoy you. It's the Annoying Peasant Radio Show.
Right. We are really annoying.
We're just doing our jobs here.
fulfilling
Just
our
like the
purpose.
cops beating the heck out of innocent people. We're just doing our jobs.
And I wrote
Anyway.
little notes down on like our time, because I have no idea how long this show is going to be. We always go a really long time. So I should probably move on and get to what my sources are for all of this information and kind of share some of it and move on. So is that cool?
Yeah, you're 15 minutes and counting, by the way.
I know. Already 15 minutes. All right. So a lot of this information came from, if you've never heard of John Taylor Gatto, Gatto Gatto, that he is an amazing man and a historian pretty much on
education,
forced schooling in America. We listened to a talk, a YouTube talk. It was called "A Short, Angry History of Modern Schooling," and I will post that on the Facebook page. But it's dense stuff. I mean, it's over an hour of just like tons and tons of information.
Yes.
But he was actually a teacher for 30 years, I think, in the New York public school system. He was teacher of the year a whole bunch of times, and then he eventually resigned. I believe when he was named teacher of the year, he gave a public speech giving his resignation, and since then he has basically spent his time criticizing the entire system. He wrote Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling, The Underground History of American Education, A School Teacher's Intimate Investigation into the Problem of Modern Schooling. And the one I read was called Weapons of Mass Instruction, A School Teacher's Journey Through the Dark World of Compulsory Schooling. So lots and lots of stuff he's written, but you can find articles, you can find talks he's given, whatever. But if you listen to or read one thing on the topic of public schools, just to make sure it's John Taylor Gatto, because he's unmatched in his knowledge, and he gives all the source information. So
yes, I remember on that YouTube that you mentioned that I did watch. By the way, I think he said something like, you can check all my sources or something to make sure I'm not.
It's amazing, isn't it? But I mean, he's going to the source documents, and he's actually, and his books are, really well documented. So we're not crazy. This is real stuff. The stuff people were going to quote, things that happened, it's all for real, but it's kind of surreal in a way. Yeah,
it's just amazing what has transpired over the last 200 plus years in the United States of America, especially in the realm of education,
right?
And that people just don't question it. They don't really think about it at all. It's just get on the bus, go to school, do your homework, get good grades, come home.
Right, and we can talk about the system's not really working, and we can say we're going to fix it, but nobody really ever questions its foundations or its entire philosophy.
Excellent point.
Right, and since we said that's what we're going to do, then now we told you what we're going to do, but we're going to do it. And we're going to explain it. So there's so much information here. I was like, how do we kind of condense this? So I'm going to try to just sort of run through some of this information, and then we can discuss it. I think the main thing that I learned was that our American school systems were based on the Prussian system, the same system that basically brought Adolf Hitler to power, the same system that educated the Nazis. I mean, they were all
essentially
following the same kind of school
structure.
Patterns. Apparently, this Prussian system of education, it was based on duty and discipline, respect for authority, following orders, the destruction of free will and critical thinking.
Yes.
Which you would normally think that an education would be to advance
those things,
critical thinking, and to use the free will and to
express
really
yourself.
Develop those abilities, but it was really designed to stop those things. And apparently that it was the Prussians, I mean, because they kind of ultimately became the state of Germany, right?
Yes,
I don't really know
my
all my history here, but I guess it was that the when Prussia fell to Napoleon, that they decided it was because the soldiers weren't following orders well enough. They were like too much free thinking. And so they designed this system that they were going to get everybody really straightened out, that they would be obedient and follow orders.
Conform.
So it was designed for a military state.
Yes.
Pretty much. And so, that it would be, the systems were free. I'm using air quotes here because it would be, paid for through taxation and compulsory, forced, required.
Right.
So how this kind of came to the United States, the beginning of compulsory schooling, there always was government schooling, I think, from the very beginning. Thomas Jefferson was a big promoter of, everyone needed to be educated, but it was a different idea before, the 1850s, because everything was still voluntary. You weren't forced to attend school. There was forced taxation to pay for some of the schools, but compulsory schooling, laws that said that everyone had to go to school, and the system started in 1852 in Massachusetts. Horace Mann, I guess, father of American education, who was a big influence. But then by 1900, all of these people who were PhDs in education were being trained in this system. They were going to the universities that were training them in this system, and 34 states by 1900, I guess, had compulsory attendance laws. And then it picked up speed in the 20s. It really got to be kind of a popular thing. And that was when these early industrialists got in on it. And that's just an interesting part of the story, too. From this talk, he said, after the Civil War, utopian ideas about institutionalizing children and subjecting them to molding routines began to be seriously discussed by the policy-making managers of business, government, and universities. And this was so interesting. He said it couldn't have happened without fossilized fuels.
Yes. I remember that comment.
To bring mass production, coal-driven machinery and fossilized fuels. It was these early industrialists kind of wanted to create these obedient factory workers. And they got really involved in this, and they spent their own money. Sometimes I saw that at one point that it was Rockefeller and Carnegie were spending more of their own money on public education.
Yes,
I'm not sure at what time period that was exactly, but they at one point they were spending more of their own money on forced education. Schooling than the government was. So that's just, we don't. Did you learn that in school?
No, they didn't happen to mention that. To me.
That's interesting. And so anyway, I'll get back to that, but
I'm not going to stop you. Keep going.
He said it wasn't just greed, but it was almost a religion. They had this philosophy that they could create this orderly scientific society. This was all supposed to be based on science, and they did not want to be hampered by these American libertarian attitudes. Mm-hmm. They were very influenced by evolutionary theories, and that they were kind of going to create this perfect new man, and it was all going to be centrally organized and controlled by this elite group of people.
Really smart people were going to do it.
It was very bizarre, and it was, and they were doing weird research and stuff like that. He also said, pointed out that all of this brought about an extension of childhood, the idea of adolescence. Before that time period, we never really had the idea of a teenager.
Right.
Children grew up to adulthood and engaged in much more meaningful work and activities, and you didn't have this kind of infantilized extension of childhood for all of this time. So that was kind of interesting. And there were more child labor laws, longer years of compulsory schooling, as compulsory schooling came in, jobs that were requiring more schooling. So that was a lot of the stuff. But, he said the purpose of it was not to meet the goals of the parents and the communities. People in the communities thought, okay, this is going to be serving us. This is the education that we're getting for our children. But really it was intended to dupe them. They were going to have to be forced to pay for it.
Right.
And they were forced to put their children into the system, but the system was not designed to serve them. I thought this quote from Woodrow Wilson, did you hear that one? And
Yes.
He gave a speech to businessmen in 1914. We want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class, a very, very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. So
amazing that it was said.
it was right there.
Amazing it was
Not a
said in a
secret.
spot. Yeah, exactly. It's out there. And again, those types of statements, people say, that just lends to your conspiracy theory. Well, it's right out there. Go
But it's not.
find
Yeah,
it.
that was a public speech from
Right.
Woodrow Wilson, and he said prior to the 1930s, it was common for the Education Trust to be mentioned in the media as the group that controlled the goals of education. That was Rockefeller, Carnegie. They said it was the major universities like Harvard, Stanford, University of Chicago, the
Yes.
National Education Association, this group of people. So it was a combination of the industrialists, the universities, and the state. And they were called the Education Trust. And that, like I said, that kind of faded away, but it was right out there in the open at the time that these people were going to organize and create the school system.
But I think it's still seen that way. I don't think most people find that objectionable, because when Bill Gates says he's going to donate so much to public
Right.
schools, people, well, that's a good thing because he's trying to help the schools, and we know our school system's short on money.
We don't ask a lot of questions about what it is that he's getting from
He's just a good guy.
what he's doing. Yeah, is he just generous? But no, I mean, he's directing the way that system works. So,
And his resources, right? He's going to have some say. He's not going to just say, here's, $100 million and, blow it any way you want. I don't really care. He's going to say, I want to make sure it gets spent this way, basically. And there's probably a lot more strings attached than that.
right. And that's what's been going on from the beginning. They said, Carnegie and Rockefeller at one point spent more on forced schooling than the government did. They were designing this system to educate children for their own benefit without public participation. And the public was being forced to pay for it.
Right.
So, I mean, this was serving private interests at public expense. Of course, we still have a lot of that
Yes.
going on today, and we see that happening, but we rarely talk about the fact that they designed the whole system in the first place.
Absolutely.
So, and what its purposes were. It was this was another interesting quote. Okay, so there's so much, it takes forever to get through it, but this was Rockefeller's General Education Board, occasional letter number 1 from 1906. This is bizarre. This one. In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryos of great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way.
Yeah.
That's strange.
I don't know what to add to that. That's just craziness. But again, it's out
like
there.
I said, this was public stuff. There's so much here, but it was basically about shaping the minds. And you went on into the 30s. This was another one, a guy who was, you have FDR's National Recovery Act. This person, Louis Alber, was the head of the Speakers Bureau for this Recovery Act. He said, we expect to accomplish by education what dictators in Europe are seeking to do by compulsion and force. I thought that one was probably one of the most interesting quotes
Very telling.
that I found, because I've thought a lot about this after I found that we hear a lot about these dictators. We hear about Hitler and Stalin, and we did that whole
Yes.
show about that. But that in the United States, they were trying to design a system where people would fasten their own chains. They wouldn't have to be forced. They wouldn't really even have to be threatened. And I think that's why so much of the time people here say, there's no threat. There's no one threatening me or making me do anything. They're choosing to do it for themselves. But we rarely question the fact that we've been trained to believe that it's right and to participate in it when it's actually ultimately against us.
Right.
So.
It doesn't serve our interests. You mentioned earlier about, the new man or the new order of man or however you describe that. People describe it many different ways, but that's also not a new thing, right? That you pointed out that Lenin talked about this. I want to say Chiang Kai-shek. It's not Chiang Kai-shek. I can't remember who the leader of China was. It escapes me at the moment. Hey, George Herbert Walker Bush said the New World Order, right?
Yeah,
this
they've
is
been
not
talking about this for a long
yeah,
time.
Every regime that comes in says we're going to remake man more perfectly or whatever, right? And
but the very people that were financing the designing of the system were participating in like research and planned breeding, and trying to do this. And we think that this was all going on in Germany. This wasn't, that this wasn't happening in the United States, but it was happening right at the time that our public school systems were being structured and set up the way they are today. And we don't even think about, we think of school, and we tend to think, well, what school looks like is people separated into age groups and in classes and all of the information divided up into subjects and bells ringing and moving from room to room and class to class. But that was all the Prussian system. That wasn't the idea of what an education was, before that time or before compulsory education in this country. Even with government schooling, you had the one-room schoolhouse where it was a really different system and a different philosophy, where you had multiple ages of children in one classroom, and older ones would be teaching younger ones, and a teacher would be more kind of a facilitator, right, without lecturing to whole classes. So, we don't really question that structure, but that was all designed to kind of create obedience and subservience.
Yes, listen for the bell. Move at the bell, not before the bell.
That's like cattle or, something, but we don't really question it.
Right. Pavlov. Mao Zedong, that's who I was trying to think of earlier. So anyway,
I thought about this when we went not too long ago to Florida, and we went to one crazy day at Disney World with our kids to the Magic Kingdom, and we accidentally got in a really long line. We hadn't really figured out the whole Fast Pass system, and we thought the sign said 30 minutes, but then it turned out it was 80 minutes once we were stuck and we couldn't get out of it, and my kids were just complaining. They've been homeschooled their whole lives. They're not used to standing in lines. They weren't being loud or disruptive. They were just whining. They were going, how long do we have to stand here, and driving me crazy. And I looked around me, and all these people are just happily standing in this line for an hour and a half. And I thought, whoa, I don't want kids that are happy to stand in a line like cattle for an hour and a half. Of course, I want them to be polite and respectful of other people. And if they find themselves in that situation, make the best of it. But I thought it's not normal for little kids or even adults just to stand in lines like this and be content. And I don't know. Does that strike you as strange?
It strikes me as strange, but normal. It sounds dumb, but... Ever been in traffic in L.A.? Ever been in traffic in Sydney? Right? It's Disney World, but you don't get to go on the ride at the end. You show up at work at 20 minutes late or something, right? But they're stuck in traffic all the time. It's just normal to them. It just, society is different in different parts of the country.
Strange, but it does cause me to question it, or to look at those things. And when you know this, you think, wow, this has all been designed to, I think of that quote. I wrote that down. It gets kind of butchered, I think, that Carlin quote. I think you said that not too long ago about they wanted people who were just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, but
not really
smart
question
enough
things.
To question, the whole system. And that was part of a larger thing that he said. But yeah, I think that's really true. He said that with humor. but it was completely true, a completely factual statement.
Yeah, and I think he had established himself, I'm going off a little bit on Carlin. as a comedian beforehand. So now he says something that is totally true. And I think I didn't actually see I assume he did that many times in live performances, and I never heard people laughing. I've only seen it as a quote, on a meme or something. But I wonder what reaction did he actually get? Did people go, okay, that's a true statement, so what? Or did they laugh? Because it is absolutely true. It's not like it's funny, right? I mean, what would actually be funny about that? And I assume he put it in his act because he did get a laugh, but again, I didn't see it. So
well, he always had the ability to say true things in a funny way.
Yes.
Oh, and I have to apologize because I've got so much information here that I want to say hi to Tim in the chat, and that I haven't really been monitoring the chat like I promised that I would. So I'm going to try if if you're listening and you're not chatting, then I can see the chat, and I will try to pay attention to that. We
and if you are
have a hard time multitasking, especially when we're sick and trying to do this.
And if you are listening and not chatting, get in the chat room for crying out loud.
Leave your comments. And I'm sorry that I wasn't on top of that. We probably still got a long way to go here.
Yeah.
But no, and so there's just so much we could talk about here. But later on in the 60s, some of the stuff with the teacher training, as the system just kept getting more and more entrenched, there was teacher training manuals that talked about chemical experimentation on minors. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
I mean, now we have this ADHD epidemic, and so many, I don't know what percentage, I think I have it back here somewhere, what percentage of kids are medicated just to get through their school experience today. And that's so sad. But no, it was the idea that participatory democracy would disappear. And hey, we have our criticism of democracy, even, the idea of voting, we talk about that, but they didn't even want that. I mean, they wanted the, and we have it today, man, they wanted sort of the illusion of that system, the illusion of, I'm going to vote or I'm going to have a say or whatever. But the idea was that this group of elite people would be in control. Behavioral psychology would be used to remediate improper attitudes, and then standardized testing is how they would measure the attitudes and everyone, being sufficiently
programmed.
Indoctrinated. And there's so much criticism today of all this standardized testing, but that's the reason why we're getting more and more of it. I think it's that parents and people don't really understand what this thing is intended to do. And so they think, well, we're going to try to get rid of the standardized testing and we're going to try to turn it into more of a real education. But that's not what it is, I guess. So.
Right. And that's why I would argue these reforms that they undertake, whatever, every 5 years, there's a major, quote unquote, major education reform. They can't possibly work because of the stated goal from the beginning. The whole structure has to be ripped down, but I'm stealing your thunder. So
no, that I think is true. And that's, I would argue that the system can't be reformed. It can't be fixed. And actually it doesn't need to be fixed because it's exactly the dreams of these centralized planners and designers. It has done exactly what they hoped it would do.
Yes. For those designers, the system is working flawlessly, right? For its stated purpose. That's what they're trying to do.
Right.
Which is what they're trying to do. It's doing that. What I guess we're saying is, parents, children, it doesn't work for you because you're likely what you want to get out of a child's education is not in alignment with the stated goals. You're at the wrong place.
Right. And that's why I wanted to give this information. Like I said, I know you're kind of trying to pack a lot of information in, but to kind of convince you, if you're listening, of what this thing was designed to do, and then go on to talk more, because we talk all the time about how we want to educate people. And when we talk about educate, we're always saying we want you to think. We want you to engage in some critical thinking, question the system, question the philosophy that you've been taught. So my challenge, I guess, to everyone would be, and I want to talk about personal experiences of that too, but would be to deschool yourself. If you've been through this system, you have to literally deschool yourself and
Explain
let
what
go
that
of
is.
this philosophy and then get an education, that you have to overcome a lot of indoctrination. I mean, don't you think there's this whole process, and that's why it feels like theoretical physics or whatever. There's this whole process of just overcoming that indoctrination, finding where you've believed things that are false and just letting go of that you have to go through before you can really educate yourself. And I personally feel like, and I knew some of this, I've known this for a long time. Like I said, I've homeschooled my kids all the way through. So, some of this information I really knew, but the more I learn about this, the more I really feel like I was robbed. Mm-hmm. I was such a kid at a very young age that just had such a passion for learning. And, I feel like so much of my school experience just sort of beat it out of me, Well, did you feel that, or did you experience that in school?
I wasn't smart enough to feel that, but what I did, maybe I was just, you were a better student than I was. That's the problem here. But no, I went to school and I didn't like the classroom experience. I'm just not a fan of, really, I got to sit here and some woman, some guy is going to talk for 45 minutes. I got to try to jot down as much as I can to remember what he said. And then I got to go read the chapters he assigned, right? And then I got to regurgitate that on a test. And you say, well, that's how you do it. And I'm like, I get it. That's how they did do it. But I always thought of, okay, wait a minute. When I'm on the job, when I'm actually trying to produce wealth for myself and thusly for society, am I ever going to really be in this type of situation ever again? It just seemed like a fictitious, a completely made up way to work with people, or I guess maybe not work with people, because in the real world, I argue that you deal with people that you don't like, you deal with people you do like, right? You try to go, hey, these facts, I don't even need to make this decision. I'm throwing those out, but I'm short, I think, 7 more facts. I got to go find them. Will you help me go find them, right? You work with, you coordinate, you do all these things with people to get the relevant facts together, and then you boil it down and go, okay, this means we got to take a left-hand turn. That just, for me, that, again, my personal experience, that's not what I had happen to me when I went through the schooling system. I just had some dude talk to me, blah, 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 tell it to me next Thursday on the test, write it down. Well, I just thought, well, that's got to be useless. When am I ever going to be in this situation again?
You were really motivated to produce and make something happen and get out of this kind of cage that you were in. I was almost just the opposite. I was so excited just to learn stuff when I was a little kid. I was just like, tell me stuff, give me books to read, fascinated. I was fascinated with science. When I was like 5, I wanted to be a paleontologist because I thought it would be really cool to dig stuff up out of the ground,
sure.
That was like old things that you could find. And I thought that was so cool. And, I was fascinated by all of that. But I remember so clearly, I think I was in 3rd grade one time being disappointed, and this is so funny, but disappointed because I got an A- in science, okay? I got my, and at that point, I didn't always get straight A's, but when I was a really little kid, I got straight A's. And I went to my teacher and I was like, but I love science and I learned so much. I don't understand why is there a minus?
Right.
And she's like, well, you just, that was what your scores said. And that was, the homework. And here we averaged the tests and the grades. And, I walked away so deflated and disappointed going, I got a minus, but I actually learned all this stuff. Then that was I think that was sort of the beginning. But, man, as you get more and more through school, and I'll go all the way through high school and everything, it was just about, I just got to figure out what it is that I need to know, and I got to plug in the right answers, and I got to get the right scores, and I just got to get the grades.
Yes.
Because that's what it's all about. And none of this, I think by high school, at least if you're halfway smart, you're like, none of this is really about learning.
Exactly.
I'm not learning anything. I remember, there's certain things that sort of flash in your mind that you remember from your school experience. I had what I think was sort of a misfortune, but then kind of was fortunate because I think it was like sophomore year. I took a chemistry class, and chemistry and I just did not get along at all. I mean, I sat there going, she might as well be speaking Swahili. I don't understand. I'm like, I don't understand any of this. Nothing is making sense to me. It was just, Did you ever get in a class and just sit there and just go, I'm taking notes, I'm trying, I'm studying, nothing's getting through, you know?
Well, I wasn't a very good studier, but I've had the rest of the experience
It was odd for me to have a class where like I really tried really hard and I couldn't get a good grade. I got like a D in chemistry. So I blew my grade point average for like all of school. I mean, once that D is there, it never goes away. I mean, whatever your overall class rank was going to be. And I was in a public school that was pretty competitive. It was a fairly wealthy school district. And so there was just a lot of competition. And I was like, well, you know, I'm out of the top group of my class. So I was like, I might as well take some hard classes because who really cares at this point? Maybe I'll learn something. And so I just took every honors class I could take or just whatever that I thought would be a challenge because I was like, well, you know, my grades aren't going to be perfection. So that was kind of good because I remember there was a kid sitting there in my class one time and he was a friend of mine and it was an honors English class and he says, I don't know why I took this class. It's just going to blow my grade point average. Well, by then we were like seniors and it was like if he got one bad grade, it was going to blow it for him, you know, and he needed to get in the right school and do all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, well, I lost that a long time ago. But I was frustrated with him because I thought, he's not here to learn anything. He's just worried that this is going to ruin his average. And that's really sad the way that works.
But I think school has almost entirely become that way. Mm-hmm. It's about grades, grades, grades. It really doesn't matter what you actually know or that you can think critically. That is even unimportant in large part to employers, right? They need a person with these qualifications to plug them in, and in part because the government regulation says, hey, you have to have bachelor degree level people here. You have to have them certified to do this. In order to get the certification, they got to show that they have a bachelor's degree or whatever, right? So they're big corporations, even small corporations, are slowly having where you have these certain qualifications that must be filled. Otherwise, you know, we don't accept your product or your service or whatever it is. So it's just becoming a compartmentalized world that way. And essentially, since ultimately the consumer, the student doesn't push back, the parent doesn't push back, now the corporations don't push back against it, and the state, of course, is not going to push back against itself. It just continues down that road. And there's continually more pressure on the grades, the standardized test scores, and all that crap that, in my view, just my view, has nothing to do with being an educated person or not.
Well, and even when the parents and students do push back, I think they find that the system isn't working toward their interests or their
Sure, you're pushing against
goals.
An ocean liner. Good luck. Right?
Yeah,
the bureaucracy has momentum.
I know. Well, and I remember too, I mean, in funding, I mean, it all like funding goes kind of where the priorities are. And I remember my husband here was very good at sports. And so he was in the well-funded activities at school. And I was in like music and, you know, just I a little bit of student government, but I did like music and theater and all that stuff. Well, like those extracurricular activities, our parents had to like donate money and make stuff and, you know, do a lot of volunteering because, you know, there just wasn't the funding that you didn't have. And then you would watch the sports programs. And so, you know, things really it wasn't really fair. It wasn't really just or equal. No. Even though it's supposed to be public, you know, and we're all being forced to pay for it.
Speaking of funding, I know I posted this on Annoying Peasant Radio a while back, but Stossel had this Melanie Dennis and Blair Phillips Lynch on a show. I didn't actually see the show. I just have the graphic up here that apparently was on the show. We're talking about funding. Public school growth from 1950 to 2009. Again, I can't vouch for the accuracy of this chart or these numbers. Go to John Stossel and find out what his source exactly was. But since from 1950 to 2009, the growth in the number of students is 96%. So basically double the number of students, right? The spending, on students is doubled. Teachers has gone up 252%. Now, well, that doesn't mean that maybe there wasn't enough spending on teachers early and this could be correcting a problem again. There's all kinds of things in here. I'm not suggesting this is a straightaway thing, but the interesting fact is fact number 3. The non-teaching staff spending is up 702%.
That's a crazy statistic.
So the point is, where is the money going in the public education system? And again, I would argue the whole thing needs to be scrapped, but it's going to non-teaching staff. The resources are not getting to your kid. I mean,
right.
that to me, that's what that points out. Now, somebody else might interpret that differently. Go ahead, but again, go to John's.
It's not about you, and it's not about your kid.
Yes.
If you have kids in public school, we learned a good lesson early on when we were considering homeschooling our kids from the beginning. But we lived in a small town. We had, I think our oldest was like preschool at that time. So we were just kind of like, okay, well, they were having this meeting. And right at that time, because our oldest now is 19 and has graduated from her homeschooling and everything. But that was kind of the whole push toward all-day kindergarten. There were still a lot of half-day kindergartens in all our small towns. So we went to this meeting where everyone was going to talk about whether they were going to do all-day kindergarten. And I thought we were going to talk about, like, what's best for the kids and, can they handle all-day kindergarten, or were they going to get a better education from that, or whatever. And it was all about funding. It was all about all the funding they were going to get. And then there was all these buzzwords about at-risk kids. It had to be all about at-risk kids. And I was like, what is the deal? Well, the whole thing got pitched kind of like these kids are at risk because they're at home. They need to be in school so they can be in like a safe environment.
Sure.
And I mean, I remember raising my hands and going, well, I care about all these at-risk kids, but it's not my kid. So could you explain to me how this is going to be good for my kid? Because I don't think my kid's really at risk. I mean, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and she's doing well and developing nicely and well cared for. So could you explain to me? And, just a bunch of blank stares. You were just it was like you were just being a rebel and sort of being annoying.
What kind of idiotic question is that?
Yeah, it really was. It was a very strange experience, and that, it did influence our decision to homeschool. We thought, we'd kind of dip our toe in the water and say, well, let's see what this school is like. This is a nice small town, small school district. Yep. Everybody seems to like the school.
Yep.
But I thought it was weird. I was like, what planet am I on?
Yeah.
This isn't about kids.
Well, there's the trouble, the monopoly situation, that, when you go to a school, a public school, they say, well, we're going to spend money. We got, $1 million. We're going to spend it here, 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 here. Where are we going to spend it, basically, right? They come to the decision that they're going to spend it on A rather than anything else. Well, that's the whole point. Then the money is spent on A. There's no money, or that money certainly isn't spent on B, C, D, or et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. It's a one shoe size fits all. If it were actually shoes, people would have a freaking cow. What do you mean there's only one shoe?
The system was designed to be centralized and to be, for all the schools to be the same. I think that was one thing before compulsory schooling. Even with government funding, schools were very local.
Yes. And
very controlled by the local community. And that was one thing, like with that experience we had with the all-day kindergarten thing. They had to meet certain guidelines and change certain things in order to get the funding that they needed.
Right.
And so it was all about getting the funding. So that centralized authority is dictating through the use of funding.
Yes.
What the schools do.
Absolutely.
And even private schools. That was one thing we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about private schools? Because I want to spend some time talking about homeschooling here before the show is over. But private schools are subject to, they're sort of organized around the same system, subject to the same regulations and the same laws. And, some receive some funding. Some of them avoid that. I don't even know how that whole system works, but it just seems to me that private schools look largely the same.
Yes.
Maybe there are the exceptions.
Coincidentally, they look exactly the same. And I would argue it's because of the regulation. They have to conform. They don't say conform. They have to meet certain standards, right? That's what you say. Mm-hmm. You can't go to them and say, you have to conform to what we want. You say, well, we've set certain standards that you have to meet in order to be qualified as a school. So coincidentally, these private schools tend to look just like public schools. Huh. Who would have thunk it? So
putting your kids in private school isn't necessarily a magic bullet. You can't necessarily overcome this problem with private school. And Tim commented here, I'm not typing in the chat, but he says, how many times do I hear teachers talking about the needs they have that have nothing to do with teaching? Like hot lunches for kids that might not get a meal at home, that the schools are funded to feed
Yes.
kids. But that was part of the design of the central planners. It was to take over parenting. It was for the state to be the parent of the
kid.
children.
Yes.
So, it isn't about teaching them these academic subjects. It's about controlling and directing their lives. And so, getting kids into school younger and younger and longer days, longer and longer compulsory schooling. I mean, in our state of Wisconsin, you legally have to stay in school till 18.
Okay.
So that's a lot. And now 6 is the beginning age. Kindergarten is not required, but 6 to 18, that's, a lot of years of compulsory schooling.
Absolutely.
You cannot leave school before 18. And I don't even know if there's any way that a student in Wisconsin can even try to graduate early. I know that was something that my sister did that back where we were from in Illinois. She graduated a year early.
I did
and
too.
went on to take college classes. Did you do that?
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't even know if you can do that in Wisconsin. If you can, you got to jump through a lot of hoops.
You could in 1979, was that? I think.
So I said, I don't know if compulsory attendance age was 18 at that time. Do you know?
I think it wasn't, because I was 17 when I entered college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if there are exceptions to kids who are going on to college.
Yeah.
I'm not
Maybe
sure.
Maybe there were.
But yeah,
no
that's
idea.
weird. I mean, I have to sign the papers, for homeschooling to comply with that law until my kids are 18. Even when they're really ready to be adults and start their lives, they're still tied to that law for such a long time. So, and I kind of got through all of my stuff with the John Taylor Gatto thing and into some of the stuff that I had in my notes for later. But there was one little statistic here that I thought was interesting and important for looking at the schooling issue. This really struck me. He said that the American economy has grown massively since the mid-1960s, but workers' real spendable wages are no higher than they were 30 years ago. And I can't remember when this talk was. It was a few years ago. Said that from a book called Fat and Mean about the significance of corporate downsizing. During the boom economy of the 1980s and 1990s, purchasing power rose 20% for 20%. Purchasing power rose for 20% of the population and actually declined 13% for the other 4/5. So after inflation was factored in, the purchasing power of a working couple in 1995 was only 8% greater than for a single working man in 1905. Uh-huh. That's a huge statistic, because I hear people say all the time that our standard of living is higher today than it was like at the turn of the century. But the kind of hidden statistic that we don't talk about is that, yes, our standard of living may be a little bit higher, but that's with 2 people working in the family, when it was largely at the turn of the century, that was largely on one income that people were doing that. And that is a huge factor in the decisions that families have to make about their kids and about school. So, I mean, this whole system kind of rides on the fact that people have to have that need for income. Government creates inflation, all the central banking and everything. And then if you just have to run faster and faster and work more and more jobs just to make a living, then of course your kids have to be somewhere, and somebody has to be raising your kids.
Exactly.
There used to be somebody home to raise the kids.
It all played into the hands of the state to do the takeover of the kids, as you stated earlier.
And I'm not taking any anti-feminist position here. I believe people should always be free to choose what they would like to do, and if anyone wants to have a career. But for it to be necessary for both parents to work full-time, then, that pushes kids into daycare, it pushes them into the public school system, and it really dictates how their lives are going to go.
One of the biggest complaints I hear about the public school is, hey, they wait too long to close it down because of bad weather or something, because I got to go to work. What am I supposed to do with my kids? Right? It's become so dependent on as to take over the children for essentially the working day that when it doesn't happen, it's a big problem.
That was the other thing. It was a shock for me when we went to that kindergarten meeting, was that people were saying, well, people need this. Their kids have to be in school all day. They can't get out of school halfway through the day because they're at work. and it was another thing that I was like, well, this isn't meeting the needs of my child, because and I have been at home, and I am so thankful to my husband for all the sacrifices he's made and how hard he's worked, but it's difficult to live on one income, and we've done it for many, many years so that I can be at home and homeschool the kids, but it's no easy road, and I can understand why so many people don't even try to do it.
Right.
You know, it's tough. So that has always frustrated me, that people don't really look at, yeah, okay, maybe people have, a bigger, houses are bigger, people have 2 cars or whatever, but that higher standard of living requires 2 incomes, and that is a huge social change in the society.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was important to talk about.
No, it definitely is. Good. I'm glad you brought that up.
I have one more quote from Gatto before I kind of wrap that up.
Here we go.
This is sort of his wrap up. Schools must train individuals to respond as a mass, to be frightened, envious, bored, emotionally needy, and generally incomplete. It's common sense a successful mass production economy has to have such a clientele. A small business, small farm economy like the Amish have require individual competence, thoughtfulness, compassion, and universal participation. But ours requires a well-managed mass, leveled, spiritless, anxious, familyless, friendless, godless, and obedient. People who believe the difference between Coke and Pepsi is a subject worth arguing about.
Yeah, then he got some laughter right there. I remember that.
That was, but yeah, that was kind of his wrap up, was that this is what the system needs to create to perpetuate itself, and it really serves the interest of big business and of the state.
Yes.
And not of families and not of communities. So
its purpose is to create conformity, right? It's to create a uniform society, one that's obedient, that whatever the state tells you to do, you just do it without question, right? You even taught that, very openly with police officers, right? I think I remember that from kindergarten, first grade, whatever, early on, that, the police officer's your friend, you obey him, whatever he tells you to do, that's what you do, right? And I just saw something on the internet in the last day or two. One post was, isn't the most absurd thing you ever heard is when a guy is charged with one offense and it's resisting arrest?
Yeah, I saw that. It's like,
I just thought that was interesting.
How can you get charged with resisting arrest and nothing else?
Right.
So your crime was saying, I didn't do anything, you can't arrest me. Wow.
So you got arrested for that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right?
And yeah.
And it is about what you were taught early on. The officer's your friend. You just do whatever he says. And if somebody says, well, wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong, there's no reason for you to even be asking me these questions, let alone threatening me with arrest.
I know you're taught that you're a criminal if you even protest, if you're innocent, and say, wait a minute,
right?
I'm not doing anything. And that's where we fasten our own chains. That's where we're taught
to police yourself.
We don't have to be policed as much because we police ourselves.
Yes.
But I was just saying, in some of these communities where some of these police shootings are happening, I think kind of the gig is up. I think in these communities they're saying, hey, wait a minute, you're not here to protect me. You're aggressing against me all the time. And people are fighting back a little bit more, talking back.
Right.
Kind of, protesting, and they're getting killed for it.
And it's just my impression that until recently this has gone overwhelming with the thought, well, then we need just to send more police into these areas and get these people to conform.
But that's what happens when your indoctrination system breaks down, and when people don't believe in the system anymore. Then just like the European dictators, it requires more and more brute force to keep them down.
Right.
So this system was designed to need as little brute force as possible because people would choose to obey and choose to comply.
Right. And ultimately, that is the way to control the population.
Right.
Because no state has the resources to police everybody all the time. Right? You have to use this, basically, I'll say it, I'll let the genie on this mind control.
Right.
You have to have
mind control.
You have to have that do the job, and you just have enough resources to take care of the outliers who the mind control really won't work on. And we can handle that. But we can't have 99% of the people not be, in line with the mind control, because now we got a serious problem. We don't have enough resources to deal with them.
I ask myself if it's really working perfectly or is it unraveling?
It's a good question.
I ask, when you see these police shootings and stuff, I'm like, are people just saying no? I mean, is that kind of what's happening? It leads me into, there was another thing that I watched. It was from the Royal Society. It was RSA Animate, the Royal Society for the Arts or whatever. It was Sir Ken Robinson, a video called Changing Education Paradigms. That's on YouTube, and I'll post it, but it was really interesting. He was talking about how routinely kids are being medicated.
Sure.
Just to be able to stay in school. And he made such a good point. He said, we're living in the most stimulating period in the history of the earth. How many distractions are there? How much information is at your fingertips? Anything you want to know, you can just Google it.
Right.
There's just distractions everywhere. And he says now the kids are getting penalized for being distracted from really boring stuff.
Yeah.
They're sitting in school, and then they have to be medicated. They have to be anesthetized just to get through their schooling, and the ringing bells, the age segregation, the boring classes, the subject, all this stuff, this whole production line mentality. The world outside of school is
not
just
like
exploding.
Yes.
There's all this amazing stuff happening. And so it's harder and harder for kids to sit there in school and say, oh my gosh, and so it was really interesting. It's like, yeah, they have to be medicated, and that's a sad thing. He was talking about ADHD statistics, how they change as you go across the country. Basically, he was just saying it's just kind of a sham, that it's not a real epidemic because it's just kind of tied to what the school systems are doing or whatever. But then one more interesting fact from this, he talked about research on divergent thinking, the ability to see more than one answer to a problem, like this nonlinear thinking, to say, what are all the uses for a paperclip? And you could think well, what if the paperclip's 1,000 feet high? Could it be 1,000 feet high? Like people thinking about things in a different way or whatever. They said, what percent of people, they measured people in kindergarten. What percent do you think measured at genius level of divergent thinking in kindergarten?
I have no idea, but I'm going to say it's much larger than later on, is the point.
Yeah, and I don't even know what the statistic was later on. 98%
Holy
of kindergartners are geniuses at divergent thinking.
There you go.
And they measured later, and I don't even think he gave the number. He said this decreases with your years of schooling. He said what you learn in school is there's one answer. It's in the back of the book, and don't look, because that would be cheating.
Right.
So if you were in the real world, then, the collaboration would be a good thing, and you could come up with the answer. But no, you can't. You can't talk to somebody else. You can't look in the back of the book.
Yes.
So those were some really interesting statistics, and it reminds me. Luke and I were talking on the way here, saying that what I hear from people all the time is that kids have to be in school to prepare them for the real world.
Yes.
What do you think that means when people say that? Because I'm like, how is this anything like the real world? And maybe our real world is starting to look more and more like school.
It maybe is, because I've removed myself probably in large part, people could argue, from the real world. But, people say that, but I think what they really mean, and again, it's part of language, and I poke fun a lot of times when people say stuff, and if you stop to really think the words they said don't lead you to what they already mean. But it's like, think about what you say a little bit. I think what they mean by that is, well, you got to get the proper grades so you get into the proper college so that you get the proper degree. Gets you to the real world.
It's like one system leads you to the next system, leads you to the next system. There was a Jeffrey Tucker article that was really good. I'm always talking about Jeffrey Tucker. It was called something like Schools Destroy Social Networks or something, and I'll go try to find it and post it. But he was talking about how it's all about stay with your class, and you're only with your peer group all the way through your early school experience, and you graduate from high school, and then that social network that you've spent years building completely disappears.
Yep.
Then you go to college, then you spend another 4 years or however many building this new social network of your peers once again.
Right.
And then poof, it's gone again. You graduate. You have to keep starting all over Where in the real world, people build social networks in their lives of different ages of people.
Yes,
some are their peers and, some are beyond where they're at. And that's how people used to build their careers and build their livelihoods. And, they would have this social circle and this social network throughout their whole lives that would continue to grow and build on itself. And now it's like you just keep breaking it down and having to rebuild it again. So I thought that was a really interesting point.
Absolutely it is.
He was saying we should bring back, and we should get more to like, what can we do about this? He's always talking about bring back apprenticeships, bring back some of these experiences where young people, and our laws largely prevent it. I mean,
Yes.
They don't let young people engage in meaningful work and real things. Luke and I have been talking about this more lately. We want our kids to do more real work, like stuff that really has to be done, not busy work that we made up to try to teach them responsibility. But, our kids are responsible for helping to load our woodshed because we heat with wood in our house. And it's like, it's got to get done. And if it doesn't get done, then of course, dad has to do it. But then we lose a weekend with dad because it didn't get done during the week when the kids were supposed to take care of that. So, we want them to learn that what you do really matters. You're doing real work that needs to be done for the family. I think that really helps them. But kids aren't getting to do much of that.
A different example, and not at all to say it's a good example or a better example or a worse one. Just an example a while ago, a month or so ago on the internet that was going around. It was a short video, and it shows this big loader. I don't know if it was a ready mix plant or something. I can't recall, but he was moving sand or gravel or something around this loader. And I'm thinking, I'm watching this stupid video. So what? A loader's moving. It's like big deal. What? Who would be dumb enough to post this? Because it's so, yeah, people know that loaders were. Well, then the camera is on this loader and he rolls past. And I am not kidding. Of course, I'm not the best judge of age, but I'm going to say it's a kid. He can't be 5 years old. Oh, gosh. And he's operating this full-size loader. This isn't a little kid's deal. This is the real deal. He's Asian descent of some sort, right? I hate to offend anybody by guessing.
Can't be an American kid.
Yeah. And the comment on there was, this kid's probably having the time of his life. Yeah. I mean, geez, he was fantastic. But geez Louise, for what you were saying, kind of make stuff up. What nowadays, you live in suburbia Chicago and you take your kid down to the sandbox playground thing and there's a little tractor dealie that he operates right to do it. Well, no, I say get up there on the real loader and actually get some stuff done, And again, I don't know if the kid was forced to do this. I don't know it didn't appear to be so, but again, who am I? People are going to make your comments, but I could see, just personally, I could see how a kid could get a kick out of that. It's like, you got to be kidding me. I'm cruising this thing. Anyway.
Well, it's exciting to do real things, and it's boring to do busy work. And, I mean, it doesn't lead to real learning. And this happens to you even when you're homeschooling. I think so much of it is, everybody's in school. There aren't a lot of, everybody's in school or work. So even when you homeschool, you can feel very isolated because you don't have those networks because they have kind of broken down. So that's been a challenge for us, I think, as much as it is for anyone else. And I did want to get to talking about, I mean, we're way past an hour and I haven't even really gotten to kind of like, okay, the alternatives. We've talked a lot about what this system is and maybe what it's taken from you and that frustration and all of that. But I think it always is good to bring it around to, what do you do now? I mean, if we know this, what can we do? And I've had personal experiences of just realizing how indoctrinated I was. I mean, that it took me a long time to overcome that. And, but I now feel after, what was that, maybe 5 years ago or so, that some of these things, we started questioning some of these ideas. And I already was before that. I was a homeschooler for a long time. So there were things that we had questioned before that. But even going further and questioning the entire system and questioning the state completely, that was a long process. But I feel now like I have really gained a lot of confidence in seeing that I can educate myself the same way that I did when I was 5 or 6 years old. But I had really, I think, lost that so much. I think I lost years. And I think I lost not only my years in school, I think many years after I got out of school I was always interested in reading books or interested in learning things and stuff like that. But really that confidence to go, I could really dig into something and really learn and really get, the equivalent of, I never got a college degree. I just wasn't motivated enough by the grades and the credits and the papers. And I don't know. I got married and it got difficult because Luke was actually in the military at the time and we were moving around and it just got hard and it was just overcoming all those obstacles. It was like, I just don't want it bad enough,
Right.
I wanted to learn, but I just didn't want to jump through all the hoops.
Hoops, yes.
Yeah, so that was frustrating to me. So I've kind of regained, I guess, in my adulthood from my homeschooling and then from, really developing an interest in political philosophy and all of this. I think I've regained my love of learning, but I'm in my mid-40s. I probably lost a lot of years that I could have been doing a lot of other stuff. So,
I to some degree, I feel the same way from my personal experience, but I was busy. I had a business for a while, and I was just busy in that world, and I'm glad I did what I did, but I'm also glad I'm out of it, because it did give me the time to dedicate to some of this stuff that I don't know if I want to say I always had. My father gave me the name Thomas because of Thomas Aquinas, who was a bit of a philosopher, right? So that's where
it was your destiny.
It was. This is Star Wars all over again. Anyway,
I think my name is Russian for fairy princess or something like that. So really, it just is no good at all. So
sweet.
Yeah. No, I don't know about my destiny, but. But no, I mean, and we, we've been fortunate, you and I think, too, in our lifestyles, which are so different, but we've had time to learn some of these things. But Luke and I talk all the time. It's so frustrating because so many people don't have the time, and maybe they know that some of these things just don't seem right, or that I want things to be different. I want to change things. Most people tend to think, I got to vote, or I just got to do this because it just seems like something you can do. And trying to get outside the system and really do something different that really changes things can be hard. It can be really challenging. And like I said, first step is overcome your indoctrination. Second step is educate yourself.
Yes.
Which we've had the opportunity to do, and I encourage people to do. And that's what this show is about, is the part of overcoming indoctrination and educating yourself. But beyond that, I wanted to talk some about homeschooling because, like I said, our kids have never been in school. Just from the very beginning, it just didn't seem like a good idea.
Okay, so let me. All right, I'm gonna. But
okay, yeah,
if you
said you had questions for me.
If you homeschool your kids, they won't know how to socialize.
Yeah, we get that all the time. That's the big question. And, I think maybe the question I would turn around and ask people is, if you send your kids to public school, is the goal for them to be socialized? Is that what school is?
Oh, no, it's just a benefit they get by being there.
Yeah. But they get to be in a classroom with their own age group all the time, with their peers who they probably don't have as much to learn from as they do from other different groups of people and different ages of people, or maybe from engaging with people in the community or things like that. So, yeah, the socialization question, that's always a big one.
I would just simply call it forced association.
Right.
You're the only reason I'm here, and I know Johnny and Julie, because we were all three of us were forced to be here, which, again, I'm not saying, well, then make the worst of it. No, I'm still saying make the best of it, but realize what has actually happened to you. You were forced to associate with, and again, people say, well, you're not forced to associate with them.
That's the real world, Tom. When you're forced to associate with people, that's just how life is. You got to learn how the real world is.
Yeah, but it's not forced association. Most of my life is actually free.
Yeah, you kind of get to choose.
Right? I choose my job. I go, and I'm there for 6 months, and I go, you know what? This job sucks.
Did you ever have the experience of getting a teacher that you really hated or that really didn't like you? And
oh, no, they all loved me, and I loved them.
Yeah.
Right?
I know my teachers liked me, but I saw teachers that really, kids that teacher really didn't like, or a teacher that I really didn't like or didn't respond to very well, and you're stuck for a whole year.
But what's so bad about that, Tanya? That's the real world. You're going to work for a boss who's like that, so you got to learn to deal with it when you're young.
Well, that's why our kids got to load the woodshed. It's the real world. You got to have heat. It'll be cold.
Right.
during this next Wisconsin winter if you don't do something in the real world.
Okay, I'll give the other one. Homeschooling, how do you get the qualifications? How can you show that you can compete in college? Or how can I, as a private school recruiter, know that your kids will fit into my school?
Well, we are there now. We have, and I was going to kind of introduce myself a little bit more. Maybe people that listen to the show regularly know me, but
she's world famous.
Yeah, I'm world famous. But no, we have 8 children, 7 of which are still at home. One is married and gone. She's 19 and she's married and gone and already running her own business. She decided to open a home daycare business and did everything. I mean, they turned their home into a daycare. She's supporting her husband while he works on an engineering degree. So
something worked.
We're quite proud of them. They're doing well. And then our second oldest is 17. She's a senior and she's getting ready to apply to college. She's going to just get started at a community college and start with that. And the frustration that we just ran into is that, they're quite ready for adult life, ready for learning. I mean, homeschool kids are do well in college and they're more and more, they get accepted to college. It isn't really a big issue, but, you go online and try to fill out an application and they've got all these boxes you're supposed to fill out that don't have anything to do with what we actually did. So then you've just got to kind of, I don't know. There are different things that homeschoolers do. Some of them go for a GED in order to solve that problem.
Sure.
Some, really homeschoolers are all different. So some of them do a more traditional program that looks like school.
Right.
We don't. We have largely unschooled high school.
Right.
Our kids have just kind of decided what they wanted to do. Our oldest decided kind of at the end of their senior year that it was like, oh, I don't have enough math credits, enough science. So she just kind of crammed her way through that stuff and just got some curriculum and did it herself. And so, okay, I can count this. Okay. And we're working on that with our second oldest, but they're all different and you can get it done. I mean, it's not hard to get, some homeschoolers go to if you plan ahead, I mean, they get into prestigious colleges and
Absolutely.
That's not a big problem. If you don't really want to do that, if you just go to any, you can go to junior college, any college credits that you get, you then establish a grade point average and do well a semester, a year, whatever, and you can transfer pretty much wherever you want.
Not
really a problem.
I've had a little experience with private schools, and a number of them have told me, and this is not scientific research or anything, just a number have told me that they really enjoy recruiting and getting previously homeschooled students into their schools. They tend to do well, and I know the criticism is, well, wait a minute, your kids do well at homeschool because they happen to be bright kids to begin with. That's why you homeschool them. So it's like cheating.
Yeah, that doesn't work with me because I woke up, I heard the bus on the first day of kindergarten for my oldest. I woke up to the sound of the bus coming for the neighbor kids, and I was like, okay, well, here we go, I guess.
Yeah, it started.
We had 2 kids at the time, and we went on to have 6 more. And I mean, they're all different, and we didn't just identify some kind of genius in our kids and then decide to homeschool them. It was just a decision we made from the beginning. Our oldest was a typical firstborn. She was very bright. She loved to just copy letters over and over, and she could read in kindergarten. And I've had other ones that just don't even, the second grade, and they're still not even, they don't have any, they freak me out because they don't have any interest in reading. I've got a 7-year-old right now that he loves numbers. He loves his math. He does great with, he'll add things up and he knows all his numbers, and he doesn't have any interest at all in reading. So, and even after homeschooling all these kids, you still just get nervous every time, and you think this kid's never going to read. But they prove to me every time that they're just different and they're just unique, and they find some reason that they really need to do it, and they find their motivation.
There you go.
And they get it done.
You got to have the right incentive, the right motivation. Stuff happens.
Right. Our 17-year-old right now, when she was 7, she could sit on my lap and I could read one sentence and she could read one sentence, and she could do that very slowly, and she would get tired. She just, reading was just so tedious. And she has multiple times participated now in National Novel Writing Month, and she's a writer and she's just really creative and she loves to write. She was a terrible speller. I was still doing spelling lessons with her, 8th grade, going, and now, I mean, she's just so much better because she just writes and she reads like crazy, and she just taught herself, know. So they're so interesting. I mean, my kids fascinate me.
Yes.
I did not homeschool because I thought I was qualified to homeschool. I really love to learn, and I knew I homeschooled because I knew my kids were qualified learners, not that I was a qualified teacher. Right. I'm really not that great of a teacher, honestly. I'm a great learner. I'm an introvert. I have a hard time with large groups of people. My kids, it's chaotic in my house. It's not like I'm doing an awesome job sitting them down and holding class.
But I think the point
we
is...
just do stuff. We live life. And
yes. Everybody learns differently. And I think that's, I just comment every kid is different. But everybody learns differently. And this whole idea of from the student side, or what you want to get out of schooling or an education, which I know they're not the same thing, but for most people they use those words interchangeably. Think about it. It is one shoe size fits all. I don't know in the local school there's 5 classes of each grade roughly. I don't know how many kids are there. But so there's 30 of us. There's 5 groups of 30 of us basically doing the exact same thing. And I know the argument I've had people say, well, no, when you get to high school, you get to choose 3 different classes or 2 or whatever the number is. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. It's like saying one shoe for everybody, but when you get to be 75, you get different color eyelets on the shoelaces or something. It's like, you got to be kidding me. You're saying, no, there is choice because you get to choose that at some point. It's just, to me, it's just rationalizing. I think they believe they're standing on firm ground. It's like, why shouldn't you be able to pursue whatever it is interests you? Don't people readily see that, just as you pointed out, this kid's interested in math? Does he not excel at that because he has that interest there? Why wouldn't you just capitalize on that all you possibly could?
Right.
The system is not designed to do that.
It's hard because some of my kids have really had confidence in doing that and been very comfortable with it. And then others really have a crisis of confidence because they see everybody trying to fit them into these boxes. And I'm going to talk about my 17-year-old again, which she won't like because she doesn't like it when I talk about her. But she's such an artist. Everything is a medium. She taught herself to play guitar using YouTube videos. She learned to do special effects makeup, which is creepy and really cool. and she's awesome at it. And, like makeup and all these things that is just, everything is a canvas. Everything is art with her. She paints things and she writes novels and she's so creative, but then she goes to try to fill out this college application and it's just all these boxes and you're just supposed to fill out all these credits that you have. And it's so discouraging to her. And I just feel bad for her because I think, look at all you've done. Look at all the interesting things that you've taught yourself how to do. But then she feels like, she doesn't fit in. So every kid is different, and I feel bad because I feel like that's sad that the fact that the system exists is frustrating her, and kind of, our oldest is a little more of an independent person who's just kind of like, well, forget it. I'm just going to go do what I want to do, but the ones that are more sensitive, it is hard for them.
Yes, absolutely.
They feel different, but they're so gifted and they have so much to offer.
I think we all feel that way at certain points in our life and in certain situations, right? Where you feel like, I would argue as being a freedom advocate, I think you've got to that point too in certain situations at certain times that you feel you do not fit in, right? And you just feel alienated in a certain way. You can't talk to certain people about certain topics.
My teenagers have told me that as far as being homeschoolers with the socialization thing, by the time they got to like senior year of high school, they told me that they just felt like they couldn't relate to kids their own age because their experience had been so different. And, I really think they reached a maturity level higher. They were adults.
Yes.
Right about 16 has been the point, with our first 2 kids, when it's like they start getting to the point where they're functioning as adults. They're making their own decisions. And most kids at that age just aren't used to doing that.
Yes, they've never had to do it before. So it's all new. Heck, you got people that are 25 plus years old that basically never functioned on their own. They're not adults.
Yeah.
I know they're of legal age, but they're actually not functioning adults.
Well, I just have the theory that this kind of standardizing everyone and making them fit into these boxes is just that everyone is gifted I know when I was in school, they'd kind of they'd track everybody into these gifted programs.
Yep.
And I was a really academic kid. I got really high test scores. So they'd put me in these classes. I had to take computer classes way back when not everybody had computer classes, but like only certain gifted kids would get like classes in like coding. I hated it. I despised it. I was like, please let somebody else take this class, but they'd put you there. And, it was like they'd track you into these things that it was like, oh, you're gifted. So the only thing that I knew 100%, I knew it was a racket. They would tell me like, oh, you got these good test scores. It's like, all my friends are gifted. Everybody's gifted at something. I'm gifted at your school system. I'm really good at this. I can ace these scores. I can get these grades. But I know kids that, and I guess that's how I always saw my kids. I'm like, you can teach yourself to play an instrument and, you can start a business, just have the confidence to just go do that. Or this kid, all of our kids know how to do different things and they have different gifts and they're different from mine.
Sure.
They're just great at stuff that I'm terrible at.
Yes.
Some of them are just really gifted emotionally and relating to people and understanding people.
Right.
I hate it that we have a society that doesn't value all these different kinds of gifts.
Right. No doubt.
That frustrates me.
Okay. So where do we want to go? What do you want to do?
I don't know. We're at an hour and a half, as we always are. Well, as far as talking about homeschooling a little bit, I've had different experiences with homeschooling. The homeschooling movement kind of happened as a reaction against this school system, and it's kind of taken two different tracks. There's kind of this real conservative, it's conservative and liberal. Homeschooling kind of started out as a liberal movement and then was sort of co-opted, I think, kind of in the 80s by more of evangelical Christian conservatives and all that kind of stuff. We've really had kind of both of those experiences. We've been in different groups of people and stuff. So that's been interesting. And the state has kind of taken the track of pulling homeschoolers back into the system with the charter school movement. That's and I won't even get into all that, but that's another kind of interesting thing to explore. And then recently here, we got involved with something that's existed in our area for 30 years and we didn't even know, but it is kind of back to that roots of homeschooling. It is a cooperative school that meets on Fridays. It's a long drive for us, but so we've had that experience, kind of talking about the socialization stuff of one semester of the year. And this is so cool because this is kids and adults really interacting together. And parents teach classes during one semester. And then in the second semester, the kids and parents the kids put on a play and they do it themselves. And our kids are involved in that right now. And that's been a whole new experience for us. So we've had a lot of interesting experiences. I think just as far as homeschooling goes, what I would say to people is that it's been so much hit or miss for us. The only thing we knew for sure was that we didn't want our kids in that system. And we knew homeschoolers and we knew that they were great kids. Tim commented here, that homeschooled children seem to be more social and capable of interacting with the real world. Mm-hmm. And I saw that from the beginning. I saw that people would say, oh, what about socialization? But I'd meet these public school kids and they wouldn't even talk to me. They'd just ignore me as an adult. And the homeschool kids I knew would run up to me and talk to me and they knew how to interact with adults. And so, we wanted that for our kids. But as far as advice for people, if I've convinced you at all that you lost something through your schooling and that you want something different for your kids, it would be to say to you, just get your kids out of that system no matter what you have to do. Mm-hmm. Do not worry about whether you're qualified. Homeschooling's legal in every state. Every state is different. This is truly a state issue. It hasn't really been a centralized thing. Some states require testing and some hoops that you have to jump through. I love Wisconsin's homeschooling law because all I have to do is go online and state that I'm complying with the law. And I've never, ever in 15 years of homeschooling ever had any contact with the state other than to just turn in a form every year. Mm-hmm. And I don't even have to tell them how old my kids are. I say I have X number that are in grades 1 through 8 and X number in 9 through 12. And that's it. Well, I mean, you guys spent some time homeschooling your kids and did a stint with that. So it's in Wisconsin, it's very easy to comply with the law.
Right.
And I do what I want and no one's ever bothered me. So, if you're in a state like that, Illinois is one. We lived in Illinois. You don't have to notify anyone.
Wow.
So if you're in a very free state, you're great that way. But the thing is, anything you do is better than turning your kids over to be indoctrinated at your own expense.
Yes. I would
just don't do that. That's it. If you're the world's crappiest homeschooler, which sometimes I think I am, I think I qualify. Just, it doesn't have to be school. You don't have to do what they're doing in school. You just have to realize that there's a better way.
I think most
do something about it.
Most people wouldn't do it because of the time commitment. And as you stated earlier, that basically it takes two incomes essentially to do what one income took years ago.
But it's not illegal to work and homeschool. And I've known several single moms that have homeschooled their kids and worked full time. I know people who have 2 full-time incomes and do it. You can homeschool your kids at night and on the weekends. There's nothing in our law in our state, and as far as I'm aware, Tim may know. I know he's in the chat if he has any knowledge about that, but I don't think that there are any laws that dictate the hours that you have to school your kids. Only that, like in Wisconsin, it states that I have to have 875 hours of instruction. That includes a certain number of subject areas. But I figure that every time my kids are awake and I am present, that they're in school. Right. Because I'm the teacher and we're there together. And so that's school. So 875 hours is not hard to come up with. We're together and conscious for 875 hours out of our year. And it doesn't matter whether it's summer. It doesn't, so I mean, you just find out what your requirements are. Some states require standardized tests, but I don't think that you have to meet any minimum on the test. It's just that they have to take the test. I might be wrong. Every state is different. I'm not exactly sure, but no, I guess I would just say to people,
just do it.
Make it happen. Yeah, just do it. Maybe that's radical, but like I said, I guess I would hope to give people confidence that I'm not doing something really great or special. I don't have some kind of special expertise. It's just what we believed in and what we wanted for our kids. And we've now graduated one and we're graduating another and they're doing just fine. And everything's turning out okay. So
Excellent.
We've got a few more to go. So
what else about homeschooling? You have more about homeschooling? Were you...
I don't know. You got any more questions for me?
Well, yeah, they would be more wrap-up questions because I think you've actually covered a lot of this stuff. So I just want to... What is education? And we're wrapping up. So really, what is... Now, I'm careful about my words. What is education? I didn't say school. I said education. And I know Tanya knows this. I'm just for any listeners. So just let us know. What is that?
Well, I would say that it's the opposite of forced schooling, which is, so a real education would cause us to engage in critical thinking, to ask questions about the world around us, to investigate things, to collaborate with other people, to broaden our minds and broaden our ideas. And I would say that our forced schooling system is designed to stop that from happening. So designed to prevent a real education.
Excellent. And I'm just going to push it back a little bit to like what Mises had said, it's to develop your ability to reason. Mises talked about reasoning, which is what you basically said, but I'm just using his word.
So the schooling system generally is, designed to eliminate your ability to reason and your ability to question. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to lose.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know. I have to ask Luke, though, because it's always about, you got to do something. And I don't know if I've done a good enough job talking about what we got to do. Because like I said, for me, the big to-do list things for you are de-school yourself, educate yourself, get your kids out of their system. Those would be just put those on your to-do list. I guess that would be my wrap up.
Excellent. No, that's really good advice. If people would actually sit and think about that for a second rather than just process those as words and let them go by. Think about that, de-schooling yourself. Again, it sounds very radical, probably offensive to some people, but
I don't know if I invented that term or if I got it somewhere. It was just, I was like, no, we gotta undo this thing.
Yeah. There's so many other places to go. Schoolsucks.org is an interesting place to go. There's
good one.
There's the term unschooling. deschooling, which you mentioned. I can't think of all of them, but there's a number of terms out there. If you kind of get into that world, you'll be exposed to them.
And I don't even know what the definition is of unschooling. Yeah. I call myself a schizophrenic homeschooler. One day I'm an unschooler, and then I want to get all structured again. And so, I don't know. I change my mind, and then my kids change it for me again. So,
yeah.
Well, oh, wait, what's that? I had that quote. What's that? It was an English poet. Somebody, I can't remember the guy's name. Have you ever heard that quote? This is my theory of homeschooling. Before I was married, I had 6 theories about raising children. Now I have 6 children and no theories.
Yeah.
That's right. Now I have 8 children and no more theories.
No more theories. You're right. Out. Yeah. Well, I hope, I think people have gotten a whole lot to think about. And again, we're probably going to revisit this topic a number of times here in the future because it does require context. And I think back of the first time I've heard something, I might go, oh, that's kind of whack, and then walk away and leave it at that. And then maybe I hear it again and, hey, I got a really thick skull. Eventually it sinks in. And I think that's where some of this is for a lot of people, just because this is so out of the norm for them. Right? This, some people object to homeschooling. I recall being in Germany with my younger one. Better not say his name. Anyway, and we were going for a walk during the day. And, of course, a guy in German basically was saying, what are you doing? How come he's not in school? And, of course,
I've had my kids get that question at Walmart before. Why aren't you in school?
And I, of course, gave the dumb American answer, he's homeschooled. And that's
illegal. That's illegal.
Yeah, that was
Germany.
Like the craziest thing to say. You should have just said, I don't know, something else, come up
with
something.
The reason homeschooling is illegal in Germany, yeah. They specifically state that they do not want any parallel societies forming.
Yes.
And that's why homeschooling is illegal in Germany. So that's an interesting thing to think about, a parallel society.
So you can see these, I don't know, I would call them more disciplined societies maybe. I don't know if that's even the right word. But, it's conformity is such it's just so overwhelming. It's just so out in the open. It's not like, they're saying, hey, we don't ask for conformity. I mean, they're out there demanding conformity. And if you're even contemplating not conforming, that's a serious problem right there.
Well, and it's nuts because kids get, they say, oh, be yourself. And,
right.
All this stuff and this whole self-esteem message and everything. And it's like everything about your education is based on conformity. How can you tell kids to just be themselves?
Just before we go tonight, I did post this I can't even remember what the organization was. They were from, oh, great, now my computer shut down. Excuse me. I'm having a coughing attack here. Anyway, these guys were objecting to the police harassing them. They were in a meeting. They were like near, I know Tim's listening, it was near Frisco. I can't remember exactly where in Texas. Irving. I think it was Irving, Texas, if I remember right. And it's actually a good video, not because you've never seen this before. I think probably a number of people listening to us tonight have seen these kind of videos. But these guys had a good time doing it, is what really caught me. And the police actually created a bigger disturbance than the protester guys ever were creating in the first place. And they were pointing this out. And anyway, they had a good time with it. My point is, they weren't conforming. And the cops had a problem with this, but they really weren't. It's not they really weren't. They weren't breaking any laws. So the cops really didn't know how to deal with them because they weren't. I got guys here that are not conforming to a cop. That's a serious problem. But again, they couldn't really do anything with it. And I thought it was an interesting video.
That is interesting. And it relates too. I mean, just don't conform. Do something different.
Right.
He says Irving in the DFW Metroplex area. I don't know where that is.
Tim knew that.
See?
Then.
He knows.
Excellent.
So,
with that, I think we probably should call it a day, a wrap.
All right. Did we do okay with this subject? I had specifically requested to once in a while get a chance to dive into an in-depth subject without taking time for current events and stuff. So maybe from time to time we can do that again.
Yes.
So I'm the queen of TMI, right? Too much information.
So Tuesday, I'm going to do a show on self-ownership.
Great.
Pretty
Good
much all
subject.
aspects of that. So it'll be a very fundamental show. We'll probably do the normal format. So I'll do some news and announcements and all that good stuff. And that'll be Tuesday at a regular time. I know we had a discombobulated week this week, but I was traveling and we were both sick and all kinds of other good stuff. So anyway,
We've all had the plague.
Yes, we did. Look for us next Tuesday if you have a chance. Thanks for everyone listening. We definitely appreciate our listeners. You guys make the show, obviously. Thanks, Tim, for contributing in the chat room. We really appreciate it. We missed you. We'd love to have you on the show with us. With that, I'm going to let everybody know you've been listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show, and we're going to leave you again with a little Mac DeMarco. By the way, we actually have permission from Mac DeMarco to play this stuff. So here we go. This is
Thanks, Mac DeMarco.
Yeah, Passing Out Pieces.
And thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Tom, put your pants back on. Oh! Show's over. You can put your pants on.
Watching my life, passing right in front of my eyes. Tell of the story, always a glory.